Okay, let's get things rolling. Melanie, would you call the roll, please?
Sure. Chair Wonderman,
Here.
Vice Chair Moyer,
Here.
Director Alba,
Here.
Director Tinsley.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's go to the Pledge of Allegiance. I can see the flag. And I'll keep an eye on it. Join me, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, with, let's see, people entered the room. I think we've got more folks coming in. Admit. All right, thank you. So this is the regularly scheduled April meeting of the Water Emergency Transportation Authority, or WETA. Its meeting is being conducted both in person and also by video conference that is being recorded. To reduce background noise, all video conference participants will be joining the meeting in listen-only mode and muted during the discussion. WETA welcomes comments from the public. A public comment period will be set aside after each discussion period and will be accepted in person and by video conference. Video conference participants wishing to speak are requested to email your name and item number you'd like to comment on to boardofdirectors@watertransit.org. That's boardofdirectors@watertransit.org. If you are unable to send an email, you still will be given an opportunity to speak on the item after those who have signed up. Please note, WETA will be holding a public hearing today on the extension of the fiscal year 2022 pandemic program. We will do so under item 7 of this agenda in conjunction with presentation of the item, after which the board will consider adoption of the program. Thank you very much. We'll now take comments from the board. From my own perspective, it's, I don't have much to say, except we're clearly going through a really important time in terms of the recovery from COVID-19 economically. Many companies have stipulated that people are supposed to be returning to their jobs in offices at least a day a week, or 2 or 3 or more, and that's happening. So people are, our commute traffic has increased, and there's more visibility of people on streets, and that's really, we think that that's a really good thing for the economy. It's certainly not where it needs to get, but it's certainly a start. And I think it's really inherent upon us to keep encouraging that and enabling that and thinking creatively of how to accommodate that. And it's certainly one of the items that we're going to speak to on the agenda today. Besides that, just want to thank my colleagues on the board and Director Murphy and his staff, for doing great work, throughout this pandemic and, here in 2022, and as well as the folks who work for us every day from Blue and Gold Fleet. It's a great team doing great things, and there's great times ahead. There's very exciting things happening at WETA, and we just need to literally stay the course. So with that, I will turn it over to my fellow directors for their comments. I'll start with the Vice Chair. Vice Chair Moyer, please.
Thank you. I don't really have anything to add. It's an exciting time as we see people coming back to the office. A lot happening in the next 60 days, which will, I think, give us more insights into how it's going to go for the rest of the year and how we are going to be adapting as people live with and work with instances of illness. So watching it very carefully and closely. I do want to suggest, though, that if we could today, I just want to recognize the passing of Richard Blum, who I know has been a big supporter of water transit in the Bay. And so I'd just like to note that for the record. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much I attended his funeral as well and knew him for many, many years. And, he certainly was, a great business leader, philanthropist, policy leader, and very much committed to water transportation. Let's turn it over to Tony and Tintley, Director and Tintley, please.
Right. I just want to say good afternoon. It's good to be here again. And I really can't say more than has already been expressed by you, Jim. I do want to thank the staff for the continuing hard work. That's about all.
Thanks, Tony. Appreciate that. Director Alba?
This is my first in-person board meeting, so it's fantastic to be here and seeing this maintenance facility in person for the first time. I echo everything that Chair Winderman and the directors have expressed here, and excitement about the increased ridership across the WETA system, the regional coordination that is going on among the transit agencies, and just the energy that exists in the region right now. And also just mention that in mid-March, on March 15th, I attended a one-day conference on collaboration between the Nordic countries and the United States, and especially Silicon Valley. And Sweden and the United States have initiated a green transition initiative, which is aimed to support and increase the adoption of sustainable technologies and innovation in the US and Nordic energy and industrial transformation. And ferry service and water transit and maritime service are definitely part of that spectrum in regards to clean technology and clean fueling of ferries. So wanted to mention that. Other than that, it's just great to be here in person.
Thank you very much. Green and clean future is very much at our core, and I know we're a lot of work that's going on right now to move in that direction. So it's very, very, very exciting. Let me turn it over to Director Seamus Murphy, please, and for his report along with the staff.
Thank you, Chair Waterman. Thanks to the rest of the board for your comments. I have a couple of items to report on. First, I wanted to just introduce some new members of the WETA team. We have here with us Linda Veray, who's our new Grants and Budget Administrator, position created in the current fiscal year budget. We're really lucky to have her join the team. She was previously with Oregon DOT and Department of Environmental Quality working on the Volkswagen mitigation funds and the grants associated with that, in addition to allocating formula funds. So she has really good experience in the transportation sector and elsewhere from a grants management perspective. We're happy to have her on board. And then on the virtual meeting, we have Gabe Chan, who's our new transportation planner. He has worked in planning for SFMTA and TransDev, working on SFMTA paratransit delivery projects. And then also is on the Trans-Bay Joint Powers Authority Citizens Advisory Committee. So fits right in with the planning team in terms of being a transit advocate and proponent. And then Catherine Parson, who is our new Marine Operations Supervisor, is a chief officer on several vessels. She has great experience in the maritime sector, including acting as an adjunct professor for Cal Maritime, where she also graduated. We're lucky to have Catherine as a part of Tim's team on the operations side. All of them are doing great work already. And we all know the challenges of being incorporated into a new organization during this time, and they've handled it really well. So welcome to those folks. Other issues, we do have a continued mask mandate by the TSA at transit facilities, which is the reason why we're wearing masks here in this facility. The TSA extended that mandate to April 18th. We've seen great news on the ridership side and just generally in terms of getting back to normal. We're all hoping that the new variant that's making its way around the world really does not interrupt that progress. If there is an extension of the mask mandate beyond April 18th, I think that would be the reason why. We're hoping that there won't be. There is an effort, an advocacy effort by the public transit voices throughout the country to separate the TSA mandate on transit from the airline industry. I think there's a growing recognition that there's much less risk associated with a short trip on transit than there is with a longer trip on a plane. And so we're hoping that that effort is successful and hoping that just generally it is safe and the experts agree that it will be safe to not need to wear a mask on transit after April 18th, and we'll keep the board apprised of any progress on that front. The PVA Public Ferry Caucus is something that exists for the first time. PVA is one of the advocacy organizations that pushes for legislation and regulatory benefits to ferry service generally. They are comprised of representatives from both the private sector ferry operators and public sector ferry operators. The public sector ferry operators like WETA don't make up the majority of the PVA membership by any means. And so Lauren Gallardi on our staff pushed for the creation of this new caucus, and it's going to be a really important advocacy tool that's really already started to pay dividends. The folks at PVA were really excited to have this caucus be created and promptly elected her chair of the caucus. So kudos to Lauren on her efforts to give us a new advocacy tool. And then on the employer outreach front, thanks for recognizing, Chair Wonderman, that this is an important time. Employers are welcoming their workers back to the office. I think more than we've ever seen so far during the pandemic. We understand that this is an opportunity for us to maximize the ridership return to the WETA system. We need to make sure all eyes are on our system and that folks understand that we're an option for them when it comes to traveling back to the office. So to do that, we've been participating in a number of employer coalition-led efforts to connect our services and information about our services with employees. The Bay Area Council has convened several employers in groups to meet with transit operators and understand how our services can be valuable in this time of workers traveling back to the office. The council has been coordinating with other chambers of commerce and economic development organizations throughout the region to do that. So that information is making its way around. To supplement all of that, we've ramped up our marketing and advertising starting now. We are going to continue that through the month of April and perhaps beyond to make sure that we're doing what we did in July to make sure that folks are aware of our services and that we're putting our best foot forward in terms of communicating why ferry service is the best way back. That's the campaign that we are continuing to put forward. With that, I will turn it over to Lauren. There's a legislative update that you may have heard about that is come out of the governor's office. She's going to share with us some information about that.
Afternoon, everybody. Hopefully you can hear me. So as was noted in the executive director's report, in late March, the governor introduced a proposal to provide $750 million to transit agencies to implement free or heavily reduced fare programs. And that funding amount is based on revenues that were collected back in 2019. And it's based on ridership levels from 2019, plus a little bit more to buffer for an increased demand for transit because it's free, as well as administrative costs. I think transit agencies are going to have a lot of leeway on how they develop their programs. The guidelines have not come out yet. We just checked in yesterday, and there's no trailer bill language yet. So those details have yet to be defined, but we are monitoring it closely. I'll also note that there's a proposed bill, AB 1919, that would require every transit agency in California to provide free transit service to individuals 25 years and younger in order to receive funding from Transportation Development Act, local transportation funds, state transit assistance programs, and low carbon transit operations programs, program. And the bill as introduced does not provide funding to offset the increased costs with providing free transit. So WTA testified on April 4th in opposition to that bill unless it is amended with to include revenue sources to fund it. So there has been talk about how those two, the governor's proposal as well as AB 19 could somehow be intertwined. We're monitoring that and we'll be bringing forward any new information as it comes forward.
That's perfect.
Thank you, Lauren. Want to turn it over to Kevin before opening up for questions or comments from the board to give us a ridership and recovery report.
Thank you, Kevin Conley, Manager of Planning and Development here at WETA. A couple of notes about the ridership. It's in the board packet. And one thing I want to point out at the outset here that I think we're going to change moving forward, that thus far we've compared ridership to our performance in calendar year 2019. And I need to point out to everyone that 2019 was a record year of ridership for WETA. And there was a certain confluence of events there. And that ridership was the highest ridership year we ever had, by 12% over the next closest year. We introduced a lot of larger boats that year. We also introduced a new service at the beginning of the year, Richmond, which really took off quickly. And South San Francisco really took off as well. So it's really not totally fair to compare everything to the best year ever. So in the future, I think we're going to start averaging the last 5 years. And I will say that also that our ridership had increased by double-digit percentages almost every year, dating back to 2014. So that's one thing to say. Nevertheless, we've had a really good March. March was up. We had 12 straight weeks of ridership increase over the commute periods. So the commute is coming back. We were already performing well. We were at 100% of our recreational ridership periods, midday and weekends before, and we've kind of, the commute has caught up a little bit here. Pre-pandemic, the characteristics of our service was we had roughly 40% recreational riders, weekends and middays, and 60% commuters. That has flipped, and it's flipped this whole year. So right now, our ridership is 60% recreational periods and 40% commute. Even with the recent growth that we've had in the commute, the recreational is still very strong and growing. I will say that the Richmond service in particular has performed very well. They're at 75% of what they were pre-pandemic. And like I said, they had really started to take off that service at the end of 2019. So all in all, the story is a very good story. We're seeing really good things in terms of ridership. We're about to go into a period here where we're going to have spring break. And I would expect us to see, as is in the past, there'll be a little bit of a deflation, especially in the commute as people take family vacations. But everything seems to be going very well, and we're seeing trends head the right direction, particularly with our commute service. So with that, I can take some questions.
Thank you, Kevin. That concludes the Executive Director's report. Happy to respond to any questions or comments from the board.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Director Moyer.
Thank you. Sorry about that. On the South San Francisco line, how are we doing compared to where we would like to be?
We're very far away from where we'd like to be. So right now, our ridership is averaging on the course of a day, 40 to 50 per trip. And where we'd like to be is minimally 100 per trip. So we're about half of where we want to be given now. And pre-pandemic, again, we were in the 150 per trip range. So we're a third of where we are. Now, we have heard from the major employers there that they're all coming back, at the end of March, beginning of April. So we're still waiting.
Great. Okay. That's what I wanted to know, what I should be looking for when we're watching this ramp back up. So thank you.
I would just comment, I don't really have any problem, Kevin, comparing us to our best year. Because, you know, we want to be at our best, and I think there was a lot of momentum that brought us to those numbers that you mentioned. That we were in a constant increase. So I take the point, and we don't want to be, you know, maybe overzealous, but at the same time, you know, there's still a lot of upside to what the potential is here. And so I guess I want to keep you all motivated as much as I can to, you know, maximize the opportunity.
I'm sorry. Oh, go ahead.
I would agree with Chair Wunderman that I think with the service levels that we had in 2019 and the increased, the expansion that took place that year, I think it makes sense to continue comparing to 2019 at the same, if you want to present both. But that's what our budget is based on and expectations going forward. Of course, we don't know what it's going to look like in 5 years, but for now, I think it makes sense to continue comparing to 2019. I do have a follow-up question about, so regional transit ridership, WETA saw a jump again in February and probably a bigger jump in March. How does that compare to the increases in ridership on BART and Caltrain for March? Because the chart only shows to February.
Right, so both of those services are doing very well in terms of commute. And if you tracked our commute versus theirs, there would be a similar trajectory.
Yeah.
They are both struggling with recreational and off-peak ridership, weekends and middays, as opposed to us, where we're uncharacteristically, you know, actually doing really well in that period.
Great, thank you. I had one other just comment. The graph that was the average boarding day of the weeks, it really surprised me because it showed that it's almost identical for all 5 days. I expected to see more of a hump Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. I don't know if there's a comment for you there, but if there is, I'd love to hear it.
Well, thank you for observing that. We've noticed the same thing. We're actually digging in, doing some analysis right now. Asi Ruano from our staff is looking at this because we were surprised at that as well.
Yeah, fascinating to watch. Thank you.
Just a couple of more things. The goes to Doran for establishing the ferry operator committee. That's fantastic. And also a big kudos to the marketing team and Tom Hall and for now going into another marketing and communications push here with Best Way Back. It's a fantastic campaign that really highlights the many benefits of taking the ferry to wherever you need to go. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Any other, Seamus, any other reports?
No, nothing else to report, Chair Wunderman.
Okay, thanks very much. Well, let's move to item number 6, the consent calendar, which contains 2 items, the resolution regarding meetings pursuant to Assembly Bill 361, as well as the board meeting minutes. Does anyone wish to have an item removed from the consent calendar? Anyone in the audience prefer to have an item removed for discussion? Okay, hearing not, let's take a motion on the consent calendar then.
So move.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Please call the roll.
Chair Wunderman,
Yes.
Vice Chair Moyer,
Yes,
Director Alba,
Yes.
Director Intensity.
Yes,
The item carries.
Thank you. Consent calendar is adopted. Item number 7, approve extension of fiscal year 2022 pandemic recovery program. It's an action item. As I mentioned earlier, WETA is holding a public hearing concerning the extension of fiscal year 2022 pandemic recovery program. That's the purpose of this item. If the proposal is approved, WETA would extend the current fares for another year through June 30th, 2023. I will ask Executive Director Seamus Murphy to please introduce the item before opening the floor to the public. Director Murphy.
Thank you, Chair Wonderman. This is going to be a team effort presenting this item. The staff recommendation is to continue the program for up to another year. That doesn't mean that we need to continue with the program for a full year. The board could always make a decision to revert back to the original fare program, which is what would happen at the conclusion of 1 year should the board approve this recommendation, unless the board chooses to do something else. The board could also choose to enact a different fare program, which is obviously something that staff is evaluating continuously, something that we thought we would be doing right now, frankly, if we had a sense of what the new normal might be for travel around the Bay Area. We don't feel like we quite have a good understanding of that yet. I think the way that ridership trends have been evolving really rapidly is evidence that we haven't really understood what the new travel patterns are throughout the Bay Area. So our recommendation is to continue this program for up to another year. And if we see some evidence that we have reached some trend that is predictable and reliable for the future, and we have a fare program that would reflect an ability to maximize ridership and balance the financial sustainability needs of the agency with that before 1 year passes, then we will make that recommendation to the board. I think that some of the ridership growth that we've been talking about on the WETA system is evidence that the pandemic recovery program has really worked over the last year. Tom is going to talk about some of that evidence. We know that it doesn't come without trade-offs, though. There are trade-offs to realizing those benefits. The way that we see those trade-offs for over the course of the next year is really revenue versus relevance. We know that there's a revenue cost associated with keeping the pandemic fare recovery program fares in place. But doing so would increase the relevance of the agency to a larger number of riders, which is really sums up the goals of the program. We want to make sure that we're capturing as broad a market as we can, that we're becoming relevant and remaining relevant to as many riders as we can during this period. We can afford to do that because of the federal funding that has come to the agency. We know that when we proposed this extension and beginning the public outreach for this extension, our federal funding was significant, was allowing us the luxury of doing this. We've received an additional $26 million in federal funding since then. So we are well positioned to be able to do this for another year while we strive to realize what the new normal might be. With that, I'll turn it over to Tom to start us off.
Great. Thank you, Seamus. Chair Wonderman, directors, thank you. It'll be a team effort between myself and Mike Gowerty to kind of walk through this. Let's see if I can get my slides to advance here. There we go. So just as a refresher, for those who weren't paying attention maybe this time last year, the board adopted the pandemic recovery principles last February. And those were 13 principles to guide pandemic recovery. And they're really designed to incentivize the return of riders to the system, accommodate expected changes in travel patterns, and attract a new and diversified ridership base as the economy reopened. Just in terms of the early results, as Seamus mentioned, we're really waiting on some stability, but you can tell if you just look at this graph and you said, I know that we'd lowered fares and increased service at some point. Where was it? You can tell exactly where it was. It's where our ridership started outpacing our comparable agencies in terms of regional transit operators and really performing well. You can see where the dips are related to Delta variant and then the Omicron variant, in addition to some seasonal changes where you would expect our ridership to go down during the winter months as recreational travel via ferry becomes slightly less attractive to people. Thankfully, winter was short-lived this year and it's been bouncing back strong. we would expect, based on the publicly available data that we're able to look at, we expect March to be an even bigger difference. You may remember in November when we updated you on our summer marketing campaign, we did roll out the initial results of the opt-in digital survey that we held in October. We found some really interesting things, of course, in that survey. A third of the writers that responded to that survey had begun writing since the beginning of the pandemic. So it wasn't just pre-pandemic writers who had started to come back at that point. It was a number of new writers as well. And then of those new writers, 2/3 of them had joined after the service relaunch in July of 2021. So whether it was increased service levels and a more flexible schedule for them, or it was the lower fares, something brought them back in July of 2021 or later. That indicates that was effective in drawing new ridership. And we also found that, one of the goals of the program was to diversify the ridership to make it more accessible to a wider variety of travelers in the Bay Area, including essential workers who don't necessarily work in an office building in downtown San Francisco, but still need to get across the Bay. And we found that the percentage of respondents in that survey that reported $50,000 or less in household income increased compared to our previous ridership survey in 2018 from 6% to 10%. And of course, in the interim, their Clipper Start became available, and WETA currently offers one of the most generous Clipper Start discounts in all of the region. We did another survey as a part of our public outreach for the Pandemic Recovery Program extension proposal. We did a full public noticing, as Chair Wonderman mentioned at the top of the meeting. There's a public hearing here today. We noticed in 3 languages on every vessel on our website, starting right after the February meeting in which the board approved going out to outreach for this. So that's been happening. The centerpiece of our outreach effort was a digital survey, which we've seen success with in the past. So we did another digital opt-in survey. We asked several questions. We tagged on some amenity and marketing related questions to the end of it, because if we have a captive audience, we're going to ask them all sorts of stuff about ferry service. We ended up getting 893 responses to that survey. Of the folks who completed the survey, 2/3 of those said that they are current writers, which means they write at least once a week currently. As I mentioned, we asked the amenity questions. Those would be really helpful internally, but there were really 3 main Pandemic Recovery Program related questions. And I'll go through those in the coming slides. The first was about whether, just a straight yes or no, do you support extending the fares that we put into place in July 2021? And as you would expect, it's very intuitive that most of the folks said yes, they would support the lower fares being extended. And so that was good to see that verified that people were paying attention. The second question was really an attempt to get at elasticity, price elasticity, in a simplified way, because this isn't a full market research survey that we were doing. It was really asking our writers and other people interested in ferry service, is the fare important? Because before the Pandemic Recovery Program and before the pandemic, as you know, ferry was priced at a premium compared to other transit options in the Bay Area. So we wanted to know, based, current writers, folks who are back or interested in coming back, is price important to them? And we found that yes, it is pretty important. I think this skewed a little higher than even we thought that it would be, based on previous comments that we have gotten on some of our services from passengers who didn't mind paying higher fares to be on less crowded transit, or to have something that was a better ride quality than the other options, and certainly better than driving. The third question was a more open-ended question, where we basically asked people to provide any feedback that they'd like to share with us about current fares or the proposal to extend them. And we got a number of responses here. 295 of those responses were relevant, I would say, to fares. There were some other comments that we definitely tracked and will take care of internally. But as it comes to fares, there were 295, I'm sorry, a few more than that, 295 positive ones, specifically about the fare extension, and then 3 that opposed the fare extension. In full transparency, we wanted to present what those 3 comments that opposed the fare program extension were. I think they were reasonable comments. 2 of them said that they don't support freezing fares unless finances and services are secure. And then the other one said that they would gladly trade higher fares if it meant more frequent service and if we could arrange for the bars to be open more consistently. So basically trading higher fares for more availability of concessions. We did want to highlight some. I'm not going to read through all of these that I've included in the deck, but they're available if folks want to read. The presentation is posted to the WETA website. And so there were 65 comments where we went through and they specifically mentioned either a direct comparison to another transit operator or driving, and specifically mentioning price or calling out an action that they would take if fares increased. And so I'll just read through a couple of these. This one person says, before the fare reduction, I wanted to take the ferry but couldn't afford to. Once I learned about the fare reduction, it made sense to use the ferry as my main commute method. This is one more car with only one person in it off the road. We have a number of comments where people, and I think, being in charge of customer experience and customer service at WETA, we know very well that passengers do the math. People do the math, people are smart, and they know how much it costs door to door to take one option versus another. We saw that over and over in the responses to this question. Folks, if BART is slightly more expensive than the ferry for them now, the ferry provides an option for them that's perhaps a little easier on them, or they feel safer due to the fresh air option outside. Some folks now, BART is a little more expensive than the ferry, or the Transbay bus is a little more expensive for the ferry, so they're choosing the ferry as their option. We have several comments on this page where people say if fares are higher than BART, they will switch back to BART. And then on this page, there was a couple of calls to action saying, I would switch if fares go up. And then this one, the one in the middle here, my Zoom panel is blocking it a little, so I'm going to try my best to read through it. But essentially, it's a nurse in the city who works with immunocompromised patients, including cancer patients, and she wants to protect them. And being able to ride outside on the ferry is very important to her. But it's only viable so long as it's more affordable. So this is something that we've heard a lot from healthcare workers over the past couple of years, people who are very sensitive about their exposure, really choosing the ferry and being helped by the lower fares. Now I'm going to turn it over to Mike Gowerty to talk through the money piece of it.
Great, thanks, Tom. Mike Gowerty, good afternoon, members of the board. I'm going to present the fiscal impact analysis here on behalf of our CFO, Aaron McGrath, who's unfortunately not able to join us today. This slide shows a summary of the initial fiscal impact that was included 2 months ago in the board item that authorized or sought to authorize the initiation of the public outreach. It was largely based on the analysis done for the original program last year and estimated that a similar impact to the original program, which was a decrease of revenue of 1.8, but in exchange for that decrease of revenue, an increase of ridership of approximately 170,000 people. Next slide. In the intervening 2 months since that board report was published with that initial fiscal impact analysis, we've had the benefit of more data. In the aftermath of the Omicron kind of dip in ridership, we've been able to observe kind of a renewed trend in growing ridership and get a better sense of where we think ridership is going to go in fiscal year 2023. And so we've had the chance to update and revise that fiscal impact analysis based on our ridership projections for the next fiscal year, which break out 3 scenarios: a base case, a conservative scenario, and an optimistic scenario. And ultimately, these are going to be the projections that you're going to see in subsequent months as we bring forward the larger budget process. But we had these available, so we were able to revise the analysis for the extension of the program here. And largely, just a note here, we built the ridership forecast projections based on the observed trends from WETA, but we use the methodology that's used by other operators in the region, namely BART. So the analysis isn't the same, but it's built on the same structure and same methodology as other operators such as BART. Thank you. So the result is we have more precision, but largely the same story. So we're again seeing the decrease in fare revenue, a little lower than what we initially projected. So we're just south of $1 million at approximately $920,000 loss in revenue compared to reverting to the 2019 fares. That lower revenue impact is the result of slightly higher gain in riders by extending the program. So as opposed to 170,000 riders in the initial analysis, we're looking at an increment of just over 220,000 riders on an annual basis that we would see by virtue of extending the program. And then, as Seamus mentioned at the onset here, the other development over the last 2 months since the initial board report was published is we have a really clear path for how we're going to pay for this. And that was the subsequent release of additional federal funding since the original item was brought to the board. So we, again, have a really clear path to the revenues that would be available to fund the program. Next steps, pending the approval of this item. As Seamus mentioned, we would continue the current fares for up to 12 months following July 1, 2022, the beginning of fiscal year 2023. At that point, at the end of those 12 months, if no other action is taken, similar to the original program, we would revert back to the 2019 fares. If the program is approved, our goals for the next year are twofold. First, we are going to continue monitoring and assessing the impact of the program. So we'll be doing the ongoing ridership analyses that Kevin has mentioned as part of the operations report. The surveys and outreach that Tom has been doing over the last year, all those efforts will continue, and we'll continue monitoring how well we're achieving the stated goals of the program. And the second goal, again, similar to the original program, we're really after developing a strategy for a long-term permanent fare program. And there are a couple things that we're going to have to kind of internal and external factors that are going to have to come together for that to happen. The first is, we really need to get a sense of some kind of stabilization of what the new normal looks like. The new normal in terms of ridership demand, how is it spreading? How is it shifting between modes? How is it shifting between transit modes? And then also on the revenue side. And, a particular item that's specific to WETA on the revenue side is the status of the regional measure 3 funding that's available to us. A second factor is really the outcome of our larger WETA business plan process. And, beyond the financial impact of lower fares, there are going to be other considerations that WETA is going to consider that are going to come through in the business plan. And these include equity, they include economic development, and then just in general, the kind of ridership that we want to attract, the how broad of a market we want to attract to the ferries. And then lastly, it's really an external factor. There's a lot of discussion at the regional level amongst agencies, as well as advocates about furthering fare integration for regional transit operators. And a couple initiatives that could have an impact on the future of what we do include the fare coordination and integration study, which is being co-managed by BART and MTC. And then also legislation, and in particular, the Seamless Transit Transformation Act, which is being proposed right now, which would dramatically change the way fares are structured amongst regional operators. So those are the immediate next steps. We hope within the 12 years to be able to propose a long-term fare program for the board. But again, several things will need to fall into place for that to happen. That concludes the report. I'm happy to answer any questions or address any comments that the board may have.
You're muted, Chairwoman.
You meant 12 months, right, Mike? Not 12 years.
Thank you.
But 12 years will give you a little time to think it through. Well, look, I think I'd like to hear from my colleagues first on thinking about this, and then I believe once we have some comments from the board, we can open it up to the public. Is that right, Seamus?
Sure.
Is that how, or do we want to hear from the public first?
You can. It's the pleasure of the board. I know there's one hand raised right now.
it might be good to take the public hearing now so that the board has heard all of the public comment, and then you can start the discussion.
I like that idea.
I'm not sure if you heard Madeline, but.
Yeah, I did. Let's go that way. So let's open up the public hearing, and I don't see the names, so let me see if I can see the names of who's can't really see them somehow here. So maybe I'll have Melanie call.
I'll call them. Emily Loper had signed in first to provide public comment. Emily, go ahead.
You're on mute.
Myself, I know. Okay, there we are. I think it needed your end. Good afternoon, directors. Emily Loper with Bay Area Council. I wanted to share our strong support for this extending this pandemic recovery program, which clearly seems to be working and attracting riders back to the system. You have significantly outpaced your peers in recovering a greater percentage of pre-pandemic ridership. Just this month, WETA hit 50% of pre-pandemic levels compared to BART, which just hit 30% for the first time a couple weeks ago. The reduced fares are particularly important, as we saw in Tom's presentation, because most riders consider that as a determining factor when choosing a commute mode. And it's also a way of accessing populations for whom the cost has historically been a barrier for the ferry. And fortunately, the cost of the program should pay off in the long run, because you have compelling data that shows that when people try the ferry for the first time, they tend to stick with the commute mode. For example, during the 2013 BART strike, you had a steep jump in ridership, which resulted in an overall 25% ridership increase across going forward. And then again in 2015, when BART tube was closed, and you had a big jump in ridership, 31% on the Oakland Alameda route, which kept going forward. The extension of the program is also particularly important because employers have delayed their return to work plans. Obviously, this program was launched before Delta and Omicron happened and disrupted everything. And our Bay Area Council Return to Transit survey data shows that this right now is really the critical time to be marketing to employees as they're returning to offices this month and in the coming months. And our survey feedback also has focused heavily on clean, safe, and reliable commutes, which ferries have a strong advantage. And the comment section just consistently is asking for more water transit service. So we're hopeful that extending this pandemic recovery program and the reduced fare structure can help attract both previous and brand new riders to the system. And I'm hopeful that they'll stick with the ferry going forward. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Loper. Appreciated your comments. Next speaker, please.
Okay, Adina Levin.
Good afternoon, board members. Adina Levin with Seamless Bay Area, and wanted to echo what the previous caller had mentioned, which is support for extending the program. The data that is before the board includes the really strong recovery of ridership compared to the other regional services. Ferry ridership is coming back faster. The words of the survey respondents saying that the fares do make a difference. And then the analysis of the ridership base itself showing that part of the current ridership includes people, lower income people who had previously not ridden the ferry before. So in the region's fare integration study, one of the components of that study indicated that harmonizing the prices of regional services was likely to have a notable increase in transit ridership. And WETA is really ahead of the game in doing basically a one agency pilot of that strategy and showing success. So because bringing riders back continues to be important, addressing new riders in a world of persistently different travel patterns continues to be important. I would encourage the agency to keep this program going for another year. Thank you.
Thanks, Ms. Levin, for your comments. I don't see any other,
Oh, we have one more.
we have one more, okay.
Loriana Castro.
Brianna.
Hello, Chair Wonderman and directors. Thank you. I would like to also support the continuation of the reduced fares, but I challenge WETA to tell a different story with the statistics. When I looked at the board packet, and the first slide that Mike Garrity showed has a slide that talks about the potential loss of almost for a great amount of money. I think it was $1 million, $921,000 for extending the fare reduction. And what I would challenge is statistics tell a story. And I'm a financial analyst by profession, and I feel like you can prove anything with numbers depending on your assumptions and your perspective. So what I ask is that look at things like adding a column to say what the potential ridership would be if you reverted back to the old fares, what losses there might be, and what how much ridership would you sustain, and then the delta between that and the potential gains that you show by having the continued lower fares. And then the loss of revenue could be turned into a delta positive for ridership gains and perhaps less. It would look like a positive story instead of a negative story. I just challenge to constantly flip the numbers to tell the positive story instead of the negative story. Gains in ridership versus losses in revenue and so forth. The other thing is that, well, there wasn't enough detail in the chart to run the numbers myself, but I suspect that if I did run the numbers versus 2019, I would be able to show versus the actual fares. I think you would be able to justify that there really isn't a very great loss. And then the other thing I would like to say is that this sort of way of thinking can play out in almost all the reporting that WETA does. The reporting on the cost of a single occupancy vehicle maintenance and gasoline and so forth versus the ride on a ferry. That story needs to be told constantly because it's a positive story for WETA. And also a number, I would like to see a statistical number for the loss of productivity when people have to be driving on the road in a single occupancy vehicle, the loss of their time and their productivity during that commute is also an important message to convey. So I'm just saying I support this proposal, but I also would like to see the story be told in different ways in the future to make WETA always look on the positive side of the many ways that you are helping the transit in the Bay Area. Thank you.
Thanks, Commissioner Kastrup. And that's I think that's I noticed the same thing when I saw the report, and I had the same inclination to say it. I know the staff are, there is a balancing act in here somewhere. And I think the staff are trying to, show the community board and the community that, there are some trade-offs here, but there are other ways to look at trade-offs, that may, accrue to more to the positive side and as we look at this. So thank you. Thank you very much. Melanie, are there other folks who have indicated a desire to address the board on item 7, the public hearing?
No one else has signed up to speak.
If anyone would like to speak, you could hit the reactions button on your Zoom and raise your hand. If not, I'm going to, at this point, I'll close the public hearing, and I'll just say a couple of things, and maybe very briefly, and maybe I'll come back, or maybe not necessary. I think this was one of, as the speakers represented, and I remember it well when we did it. It was one of the really great things that we did at a critical time, and it was risky to do it, and it sort of flew in the face of established public policy and the conception of fare box recovery and all of that. But, we're not in normal times. I think what we knew going into doing this is that, ferries are expensive. And in a world where we're trying to encourage more people to ride, many of whom really can't afford the prices we were charging. I think that was another issue in combination with just the economics of the moment and kind of getting people motivated to, give public transit, in this case, our system, a chance. So, we did that. I think we sort of went to, we considered options. We went to the mat on it, and we had results that I think we should be very proud of. And we, as was said, WETA got out in front of this as a leader. Some others have certainly followed. And I think, given that we're still in the cloudy period, Monique Moyer, our colleague, said, we're still, maybe 60 days out from seeing where this thing might go and be able to make some more solid projections on return to work. So everything that we could do at this point to continue to provide an incentive, I think, is really important. And then, then as Mike Gardy said, there's the long-term view, there's the long-term question here about our fares, and that has to be looked at perhaps in line with, the greater transit community in the Bay Area as we're trying to synchronize the fare structure. So I think there's a lot ahead of us, but for today, I'm very comfortable with extending this for 12 months, giving us some a runway on this, and then, hopefully attracting as many, using it as a way to attract as many folks onto our vessels as possible. So let me turn it to Director Moyer next.
Great, thank you very much. First and foremost, thank you to our speakers from the public for joining us today and sharing your comments and your wisdoms. I really appreciate that. I also want to recognize and thank the staff for the hard work that went into the presentation today. I really wish it had been part of the board packet so it can be part of the public documentation. It would have really helped me with my review over the weekend, and hope there's some way to get this into the public domain long-term. But I really, I found the commentary in the presentation to be exactly what I need to help understand the implications. It was what I was expecting, frankly, but it's good to have that reaffirmed. I have a question. So with the base case scenario, if the base case assumption is that the added ridership is almost 250,000 riders, what does that bring the total base case ridership to? What is the total number of passengers?
I'm going to put our new guy on the spot here a bit, Gabe Chan, who helped do the projections. But Gabe, I want to recall it's about 1.7 million, and I'm going to filibuster a little bit to see if you have to pull up the spreadsheet with the final.
Welcome to all of the new team members. It's a good segue. We'll filibuster for you a little bit as well, and just use that as an opportunity to welcome everybody to the team.
And Melanie, maybe if you can make sure that Gabe is able to speak. I don't know if he needs co-host status.
He's able to unmute.
So it looks like, hi everyone. It looks like we're at about 1.85 million for FY23. That's over the course of the whole year. And so that basically escalates starting in Q1. We're assuming about 50% of pre-pandemic ridership levels. And then by the end of FY23, we're at about 70%.
Okay, so I'm going to use 1.85. So that means that I like to consider myself in the same camp as Commissioner Kastrop. And so that means that the program equates to about 50 cents a rider, which to me is de minimis for the benefits that it provides, as Chair Wonderman said. particularly to the community that it's serving. And I think what was so telling from the survey was the comments from the folks that responded as to how it is impacting their daily lives. And that's exactly what the two sources of funds here are intended to do by the federal government. And it's one of the best, frankly, the best uses of those funds that I've observed. We've been so fortunate to be able to fund our staff through this whole experience. And now here's a way that we can help just the community at large, whether they're other workers, or in this case, we saw even student population. So I think this is just a phenomenal program. And I really hope there's a way to append this into the record as it would normally be in the staff report. So my kudos to everybody for the effort. And I haven't seen yet how, I'm going to make the presumption that we will have a balanced budget when we come back to do our budget. But presuming that, I'm beyond supportive of this program. So thank you.
Thanks, Director Moore. Director Alba, I see you have your hand raised.
Yeah, I'd like to just add to what Chair Wunderman and Director Moyer have just expressed here. And Mariana, thank you so much for bringing this up, that it is definitely possible to put a positive spin on this. So Gabe and Mike, in the table, I have the table in front of me with a conservative base case and optimistic estimates. Is this FY22 data in front of us, the ridership estimates here? Or is it projected for FY23?
Director Alba, it's projected for FY23.
Oh, okay, so this is, okay, so, and what I'm trying to say as well is that we, for FY22, our projected revenue, or sorry, our budgeted fare revenue was 8.26 or 8.27 million. And that's increasing to, in the base case, to 11.2 million. And so I think that's something to recognize as well, that we do see a significant increase in fare revenue between 2022 and fiscal year 2023. And I also want to say that considering the high cost of gas at this time as well, that we're having a strong campaign right now is really important, because so many people are hurting. They're not able to fill up their cars to get to work. And for the ferry to continue with the program, the pandemic recovery program, is one way to support those who can't take this trip by ferry rather than by driving and paying both for extremely high gas and parking, etc. As we all know, the pandemic recovery program has been really important both for lower income riders. So we've increased from 6% to 10%, which seems marginal, but that's almost a doubling, or a 70% increase, which is big. Whatever we can do to continue marketing the Clipper Start program so that it's clear the savings that low-income citizens can achieve by signing up for that program and hopping on the ferry would be highly beneficial. And then also, again, just the new ridership that we've gained, with 2/3 of riders being new riders after July, that's fantastic. So there are so many reasons to put a positive spin on this. It's $1 million potentially lost, but the gains are tremendous for those who really need the ferry to get to and from work, and for recreational purposes as well.
Thank you, Director Alba. I can't see you, Director Tintley, but if you'd like to make a comment.
Right.
Certainly.
I don't, right, thanks to, I'm on my phone, as you know, and for some reason I can't pull up the picture, and I don't want to lose you by touching it. So I just want to say at this point that I'm convinced that we should do this, and I'd like to make the motion to approve the recommendation.
Thanks, Director Tintley. We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, so we've had a public comment period, which has been closed. We've had a great presentation, a motion, and a second. Madam Attorney, have we handled this appropriately?
I believe we have, Chair Wonderman, but why don't we check with the secretary, the board clerk, to make sure that we have included all of the public comments at this point? Has anything else come in?
No one else, nothing else has come in.
Okay, so that would conclude our public comment period. And I would just note for the record, as to Director Moyer's question, that all of the materials that pertain to this effort, including all of the public outreach efforts that Thomas Hall mentioned, and the notices and the surveys, as well, this PowerPoint and set of slides that we just went through, will all be included as part of the public record.
Okay, great. Thank you for that.
Thanks, Madeline. Okay.
Sure.
So I believe we have a motion in a second. If it's appropriate, then please call the roll.
Chair Wonderman,
Yes.
Vice Chair Moyer,
Yes.
Director Alba,
An absolute yes.
and Director Tinsley.
Yes.
The item passes.
Very, very good. I mean, very, very good. Very, very pleased that we could accomplish that and maintain that, build on it. Let's turn to item number 8 on our agenda, please, which is to receive the Berkeley Ferry Service Business Plan. This is an action item.
Good afternoon again. I'll be presenting this item. And before I dive in, I want to acknowledge the consultant team that's with us today. As usual, they do the work, and the staff presents the majority of the content. So I want to acknowledge 2 firms that have partnered to work with us on this, CDM Smith, and CDM Smith is represented by Bill Hurl today, and then Economic and Planning Services. And we have Rosanna Wren with us today on behalf of Ashley Kennett, who's unable to join us. We also have a couple of our partners from the city of Berkeley in attendance, and I just want to acknowledge them as well. They've been very instrumental in the partnership and getting the project towards gotten to it at this point. We have Nelson Lamb and Roger Miller, who are both partnering with WETA on the Pier Ferry study. So let me pull up the presentation. So before we start in, I just want to kind of explain the why of why we're doing this. Really, the goals of the study here, and I've identified 4 goals. The first goal is to really support the kind of larger effort that's underway with the Pier Ferry study, to specifically look at, through the terms of an MOU that the city of Berkeley and WETA entered into in 2019, to look at the potential for a joint development project to build not only a ferry terminal at the Berkeley Marina, but also a recreational facility that would replace the current municipal pier that's unavailable for public use. So it's taking what have traditionally been seen as 2 independent projects and looking at the opportunity to jointly develop them and leverage the benefit of the respective partners in pursuing a joint project. A second goal, and this is really a WETA-focused goal, is to assess the feasibility of operating a potential project at a future facility. And we have very clear and distinct policies in place, namely our expansion policy, as well as our terminal access policy, that provide some guidance in terms of what we look for in a potential service and as it relates to productivity and financial performance. Third goal is promoting transparency. We want to really be clear and provide all the information possible about what it is we're proposing to do, why we're proposing to do it, and how we got to how we arrived at the conclusions. And so to the extent possible, we've tried to daylight every assumption that we're making about the feasibility and the operating characteristics of the project. As conditions change, it's our intent to update this plan. And so fourthly, we see this, a goal for us is for this to really be a living document. In that sense, we see this as a starting point rather than an ending point. It's very early in the project. We haven't even initiated the environmental review, permitting, preliminary or final design phases yet, all of which could provide additional information that would beg for a revision in the assumptions or the underlying characteristics of this plan. And those would be changes that we would make as they become known. So I just kind of want to set that as the context for why we're bringing this forward today. Before we get into the presentation, I'll note that the full document of the plan is available online for download and review. And then we've also provided a written summary of the plan in the staff report that accompanies the board agenda. So there are those two means of review available. And then we're also, Roseanne and I are going to walk through kind of a PowerPoint presentation that just highlights some of the major findings from the larger document. This first slide shows the specific services that we're considering. This project has been on the books for some time. We felt it was important to kind of revisit and confirm the potential destinations that would be served for Berkeley Ferry Terminal. And so we screened several potential destinations, and it's documented in the larger plan, and concluded that there were 3 potential destinations that really warranted further study and inclusion in this business plan. They include the core service, which I think we've always anticipated from the beginning days of the project, which is Berkeley to San Francisco, specifically the ferry terminal. This would include weekday service as well as weekend service. And unlike kind of the commuter-only service model that we've had on several of our expansion routes prior to 2019, we're looking for this to be more of an all-day service. And that's partly in response to some of the new normal shifts in ridership demand that we're seeing post-pandemic. So this is about providing service during midday periods and late evening periods, in addition to the AM and PM commute periods. A second destination would be an indirect connection to Mission Bay. So this would be really leveraging the efforts to advance another project that we're just working on, which is a Mission Bay ferry service. So there would be the potential opportunity to time a connection from Berkeley to the ferry building to coincide with a continuing vessel from the ferry building to the Mission Bay and offer a potential ferry option, water transit option to get from Berkeley to Mission Bay. The third service scenario that we felt warranted carrying forward is a potential connection between Berkeley and Larkspur on the weekend. And this would create a potential opportunity not only for East Bay residents to get to Marin and access recreational activities, but also, as you'll see later in the presentation, a potential economic development opportunity for the city to bring people from the North Bay, from Larkspur, from Marin, to events, activities occurring in the Berkeley Marina. So taking those 3 service scenarios, we leveraged the expertise of CDM Smith to generate ridership forecasts for those services. So these are the resultant ridership forecast numbers for each of the services. They're based on Alameda County Transportation Commission regional travel demand model that output an unconstrained demand number. CDM Smith worked very carefully to assess and adjust those unconstrained demand figures based on a variety of factors, such as service frequency, vessel capacity, and then post-pandemic travel demand patterns to arrive at the forecast that we show here. So in year 1 of the service, which is projected to begin in 2026, we're showing just under 2,000 riders for both the San Francisco and Mission Bay connections, and approximately 500 riders on the Larkspur weekend service. In terms of validating whether these numbers pass the smell test, if they seem reasonable, we overlaid them on top of the daily average ridership totals that we had for our existing services in 2019, and found that we did feel that they looked reasonable. So they are consistent with what we've seen in terms of ridership on our existing services pre-pandemic. A specific issue that the plan addresses are first last mile connections. And we think in particular for the Berkeley service, this is an important challenge to recognize and develop a strategy for. The two kind of considerations that make it particularly important in Berkeley are not only the location of the ferry terminal, but also the mutual desire of WETA and the city to limit the amount of parking that's going to be available for potential ferry riders. In the analysis that's documented in the plan, the consultant team in WETA worked together to look at other services operated by WETA and made the determination that accommodating the amount of ridership forecasted is feasible on this project based on the access patterns of our other terminals with the amount of parking that's being proposed here, which would be a maximum in the range of about 250 spaces. The plan also identified the importance of if that mode split is to be realized, and we do think it's feasible, it's going to be really important to focus on providing alternate terminal access modes. So this is specifically public transit, shuttle services offered and funded by both private and public entities, and then other forms of access, bicycling, rideshare, other micro-mobility means that are kind of present now and potentially emerging into the future. The other finding of the plan is that a real key to achieving the mode split that we see as being required here to make the project work is to really work with the city and partner to promote a transit demand management program that not only incentivizes these alternative modes, but potentially discourages single occupancy vehicle driving and parking at the terminal, most likely through the imposition of parking fees. One of the key contributions of the consultant team in terms of developing the plan was to create a financial model that projected the cost of the potential services. So this table shows the year one cost in year $1, 2026, of the San Francisco service, which is just under $7 million per year, and the weekend service to Larkspur, which is about $1.6 million per year. Of note, this project, from the initiation of this project, and this is the first time WETA has done this on a project, we are designing the project to implement electric vessels. So the assumption here is that there would be two 250 passenger electric vessels built and procured specifically for the project to operate the two services. These costs of note are based on the equivalent of operating a diesel-powered 250 passenger vessel. We just don't have enough information on the cost of electric vessels yet to really give that level of detail. But as the information becomes available on electric costs, this would be the type of revision we make to this plan to make sure it's current with the assumptions that we're making about the project. This next slide is very important. This is really the feasibility assessment of the project based on WETA's system expansion policy that indicates a service by year 10 of its operation needs to recover at least 40% of its fare box operating expenses. And so based on the revenues projected for the ridership forecast and the cost of the services from the previous slide, the plan indicates that the Berkeley to San Francisco service would capture over 50% of its fare box operating expenses, while a Berkeley Larkspur service, when accounting for special events, would recover about 40% of its operating expenses. Of note here, in both cases, actually, when you look at both services together, you would require about 40% of the operating expense to be provided by operating subsidy. The current assumption on the project, and this has been in discussion with WETA and the city of Berkeley, is that that subsidy would be provided by WETA more likely than not through RM3 operating expenses available to WETA. So we have a pretty good sense of operating costs and potential operating revenues. An area that's less developed at this point of the project are the capital costs required to build the facility. So these are an estimate of the capital cost for the waterside infrastructure, which includes the pier that would support the joint development of the project, not only the ferry terminal, but also the recreational access pier. That pier is projected to cost approximately $69.5 million. We are currently in discussion with the city of Berkeley on how those costs would be potentially shared, given that the pier has elements that relate both to the ferry terminal and the recreational facility. Those discussions are ongoing, and we anticipate bringing back additional information to the WETA board in the context of an amended MOU that would potentially define a cost-sharing arrangement for the project and future steps to continue developing the project. Those are the waterside expenses. On the land side, the costs come in at approximately 14 million. Same situation where the cost-sharing arrangement has not been defined yet, but would be in the coming months. And the total, the land side and the water side costs together come to $83.5 million, which excludes the cost of the two new 250 passenger electric vessels, which would come in at $32 million. Again, cost sharing arrangement to be defined, but coming back to the board potentially in the next few months. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Rosanna Wren to walk through the economic development opportunities and equity considerations that we looked at as part of the business plan.
All right, thanks, Mike. Yeah, I'm going to walk through the rest of the presentation, starting with these economic development opportunities. You know, we anticipate that ferry service can support a lot of existing activities, which are highlighted in the chart in blue, as well as attract new opportunities, and those are in green. And in terms of what's already happening, ferry service would be able to help get Berkeley residents to their jobs in San Francisco, and vice versa with San Francisco residents to Berkeley, as well as improve recreation connections to recreational opportunities in Berkeley and Larkspur. We also anticipate that there would be a lot of potential new activities that could be attracted if there is ferry service in place to support that. And a couple of examples would be event programming at the waterfront, such as festivals or concerts, expanded hotel conferencing opportunities, or possibly attracting new businesses to West Berkeley with the establishment of the ferry as a commuting option. Next slide, please. Next slide. Okay, and in terms of equity, we took a preliminary look at some of the equity implications and found multiple ways that ferry service can improve the accessibility and economic conditions for its users, especially those underserved by public transit in West Berkeley. And I'll go into more details in the next few slides, but in summary, there is also potential for ferry users to reach higher salary earnings and a greater number of job opportunities facilitated by ferry service in Berkeley. Next slide. Okay, so this map of Berkeley has the 1, 1.5, and 2 mile radii from the marina in red, and the census tracts that are covered in that range. So we can see where key points of interest lay relative to the marina. And within 1 mile, we can see employers like Bayer or retail destinations like 4th Street. And moving out another half mile, we can capture University Village and Kaiser. And then with 2 miles, we have more of those residential neighborhoods plus North Berkeley BART station. And on the map, those blue dots are the BART stations in the area, and only the North Berkeley BART station is within 2 miles of the marina. So that kind of shows the area's current limited access to Transbay Transit. And finally on the map, you can also see that the Berkeley campus is about 3 miles away. Next slide. For a bit of demographic analysis, we looked at socioeconomic characteristics, taking those same radii and then also adding the city of Berkeley as a whole, plus the combined region of Albany, Berkeley, and Emeryville to see how the area closest to the potential terminal compares with these broader geographies. So I'll just call out a couple of main observations here. In West Berkeley, we also see a lower percentage of residents who use public transit as their primary commute mode. So that is just another reflection of the more limited options of public transit within our 1 mile radius, just as I pointed out in the maps earlier. And in general, we also see slightly lower median household incomes, higher unemployment rates, and a higher non-white population within a mile relative to our other geographies. So that suggests that ferry service might benefit a more socioeconomically diverse population. Next slide. Okay, so with those socioeconomic demographic indicators as some background context, we also looked at the opportunity for job access that ferry service could support elsewhere. So using California Employment Department data, we looked at the average salaries by occupation in the East Bay counties of Alameda and Contra Costa and compared them with the average salaries in Peninsula counties of San Francisco and San Mateo. And on this table here, that's just a subset of the occupational categories that we evaluated and the average salaries in this area. But you can see on the, on the far right column that, these jobs pay more on average across the Bay, and the salary premiums can range from, 13 to 27%. And when you look at all the occupational categories, and which include more than just what's shown here, there's an average salary premium of about 21%. So this suggests that, people who live in the East Bay but have the ability to commute across to San Francisco and Peninsula have that potential for a higher salary earning. Okay. And related to that is how new ferry service has the potential to improve access and connections to those jobs. So this map is a heat map that indicates the number of jobs that can be accessed from a given location in Berkeley via 30 minutes of transit. And so the warmer orange red colors suggest more jobs reachable. And again, the blue dots on the map are the BART stations, and you can kind of pick out the correlation patterns to job access and see. And you can also observe, because we have those red radii circles, again, how our marina area compares. So right around the potential terminal and within 1 to 2 miles, we have access to relatively fewer jobs within a half-hour transit ride, and which suggests that those residents could currently face longer commutes to transit. And with that, you can start to put together the picture of how ferry service can improve not only access to the higher paying jobs, but also just the sheer number of them. So, which is especially beneficial for a population that might be underserved by transit services. Next slide. So with that, I'll wrap things up with a few next steps on improving feasibility beyond what we've covered here today. So first, number one, a first area of further study is to identify, you know, service efficiencies such as interlining or sharing vessels between routes. Number two, as mentioned, you know, this service is proposing electric zero emission vessels, and as the costs and savings of those become known, further study of those cost savings would be important as well. Number three, further study of the potential emergency response role that ferry service could fulfill in Berkeley would also assist in justifying ferry service there. Number four, new efforts at obtaining capital and operating funding and uncovering possible additional sources for the necessary infrastructure. And then further planning and development of the ferry terminal areas in Berkeley, San Francisco, and Larkspur. And finally, just efforts to develop sources of local funding. And, you know, some examples of that might be inclusion in capital improvement programs and creation of special funding sources. So to wrap things up, as our study demonstrates, this service as proposed is feasible against WETA's evaluation standards. And furthermore, you know, with ferry service at the Berkeley Marina, that really opens the door for additional economic development opportunities and equity benefits. And all of this is captured in the business plan, which, as Mike has mentioned, is going to be a living, evolving document, which will capture more of these findings as they're understood. So that really concludes our presentation. Thank you so much for listening today, and we'll take your questions.
Thanks, Rosanna, and thanks, Mike. And we do have a number of folks, I think, who want to speak on the issue. Maybe we'll, you know, I'll make a couple of comments, and I want to say how much I appreciate the amount of work you've put into this and continue to put into it. It's from my standpoint, it's really it's kind of a missing tooth not to have Berkeley as part of the system. You know, it makes tremendous sense. You know, Berkeley is it's a major city. It's a really important city. And there's a lot of folks today, I'm quite sure, who use their vehicles because there's no ferry option. And I think, you know, potentially this could be a brilliant addition to the city of Berkeley. I'm looking forward to hearing from the city. The Mayor Aragon has been, you know, tremendously supportive. It's great to see this kind of partnership. You know, it's sort of a model for what should be in trying to create an asset like this. And I know there are naysayers to it. I know there's people in Berkeley who don't think this should happen, never thought it should happen. Maybe it won't happen, but you know, I think it's you know, if we can pull it off, it makes a lot of sense. It is, you know, there are, as you pointed out, and it is reflected in the plan, there are major considerations for being in a place where we don't have adjacent major, you know, people living there or work going on there. So it's a, you know, it's a recreational area. So you know, we don't want to turn that area into one big parking lot for the ferry system. So being able to get people to and from the terminal without having that happen is going to be, you know, is going to be quite critical. Maybe I'll open it up to my fellow directors first for some comments, and then we'll go to the public, and then we'll come back. So fellow directors, questions?
Well, speaking for myself, Chairwoman, I'd really love to hear from the public first, unless Director Alba, you wanted to make some comments.
I'm fine
first?
without you.
Okay, if there are no urgent needs to comment at this point, I'll open it up to the public. I'll start. I know Nelson Lamb from the city of Berkeley is here, so I'm going to start with Mr. Lamb.
Oh, thank you, Director Wonderman. Good afternoon, Chair and members of the board. My name is Nelson Lam. I'm the City of Berkeley's project manager for the Berkeley Ferry Terminal Planning Study. I have worked closely with WETA staff, Mike Ogerty and Kevin Connolly, on this project for the past 3 years. So the project involved an extensive community outreach process and technical engineering studies in order to develop the preferred concept that Mike just shared as part of his presentation a few minutes ago. So we presented this concept to the City Council this past December and received quite a bit of positive feedback. So the business plan developed by WETA was and will continue to be a key part of this project because it shows how ferry service in Berkeley can help enhance public transit, economic development for the entire Bay Area region, help address equity, and with focus on recreation. So we look forward to continue our great collaboration with WETA staff on the next step of the Berkeley Ferry Terminal project. And nice job, Mike, and your consultant team on another excellent presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Lamb. Appreciate it. The next I have David Fielder. David here, I see it. Mr. Fielder.
Thank you for this opportunity to speak on the Berkeley Ferry Service Plan. My name is David Fielder. I've been a resident of Berkeley for over 45 years. I've been enjoying Berkeley's marinas, parks for almost that entire time. Going back through my files, I found presentations regarding WETA's plans to site a ferry terminal in Berkeley that I gave to this same board back in 2009. The main difference this time is the carrot being offered to partially fund replacement of the Berkeley Pier. Unfortunately, that carrot comes with several sticks. My concerns are as follows. There's a huge difference between turning a site, such as the Point Richmond Ford Assembly Plant area, into a commuter hub versus transforming Berkeley's marina, Jewel, into one. My background photos have documented the difference between the two sites. In particular, the last first mile access problems with this site are dramatically different, as you just heard. The business plan you are receiving today also alludes to the potential for ever-increasing WETA operational subsidies being supported through increased Berkeley residential sales tax or property taxes. Given your own survey data, the ridership is affected closely by the price differential between BART, AC Transit, and the ferry. That concern will grow. In spite of the obvious value of conducting a transit experiment by siting a medium capacity ferry within the inner harbor, perhaps using the Hornblower docks, that approach has not been considered. In closing, please evaluate the public concerns you are hearing today, particularly the detailed statement that you have received from Jim McGrath. In doing so, you may find that as you did in 2009, this plan to use the Berkeley Marina for a ferry terminal, a high capacity ferry terminal and commuter hub is perhaps not the best use of the public funds you have been entrusted with. Instead, I urge you to pivot to an inner harbor, smaller scale approach. I expect there would be significant decrease in opposition, along with increased economic opportunities for the marina. Thank you again for allowing me to speak.
Thanks very much, Mr. Fielder. Next on my list, I have Gordon Stout. Mr. Stout, there you are. You're muted. There you go.
Okay. Am I here and audible?
Yes, now you are.
Okay. I am a Berkeley naysayer. I have spent, I don't know, since I was the last 65 years having the Berkeley Marina be a big chunk of my life. Bigger chunk at sometimes than other times, but I've been a sailor and a windsurfer and flew radio control gliders on the north side. I walked my dog there. I love the place. I would hate to see it turn into a commuter hub And, like the big benefit is that we get to have rock and roll concerts when you can't go down there to save your life. I really don't want that. I think it's very ambitious of you guys to think that you can put 900 people through the ferry with a 250-person lot. I checked the presentation that went to the city council, shows 31% talking about mode shares, 31% drive-alongs, 15% carpools. Those numbers don't add up to 915 to your projected ridership. They add up to 695. So the question is, would you be happy if you only put 695 people through there instead of 915? And let me back up to a further question. If the biggest lever you have for making it work for people to be able to park to go sailing in the South Cove of the water of the Berkeley Marina, the biggest lever you have is the number of tickets you sell. Are you guys willing to sign up for selling only the number of tickets that you can sell without interfering with parking? Now, if you do a brilliant job on mode share, although this isn't actually within your power, really. I mean, you could help, you can kibitz from the side, but how does WETA get people to ride their bike? I don't know. How are they going to get me to ride my bike? I would love to be able to ride a bike down there, just saying, but I can't. It's not in the cards. If we can't get the incredibly efficient mode of access scheme going, are you willing to back off and say, okay, Berkeley is not going to be one of WETA's star locations where the ridership just goes up and up and up. It's capped, essentially long-term. There's no new place to put parking down there. Is that my time?
Yes.
It is, but if you have a final closing comment, we'll take it.
I think you should agree that you will never sell more tickets than you have parking spaces for. If you'd agree to that, I would go a long way towards saying not so very bad.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Mr. Stout. We appreciate it. The next speaker is Claudia. I apologize that I probably won't get your name right. Kauchinka. I'm sure I said that right.
That's okay. My name's Claudia Kopczynska. Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah. And I serve on the Berkeley Parks, Recreation and Waterfront Commission for the district within the marina. And when I learned that a WETA ferry might be coming to our town, I have to admit that I was a fan. But since that time, after attending all the public workshops, all the discussions we had on my commission and that I've had with marina stakeholders, my enthusiasm has not only waned, but has been replaced by skepticism and unfortunately distrust. I was hoping that the financial needs of the marina, which really are dire, was going to be buoyed by a new ferry, but quite the reverse seems to be the case. Instead of an economic engine, it will be a drain on the marina and on the city of Berkeley. In fact, we just learned that you might be looking to tap into resources such as our TOT money that we ourselves were hoping to keep in the marina. And yet another tax measure, you might be proposing another tax measure on the ballot to the well overtaxed Berkeley voters to actually bear some of the cost of purchasing ferries and even operating them. It would be foolhardy to think that the savvy voters in my city would be swayed into helping to subsidize a transportation alternative that would only serve so few people. What most concerns me, besides the weak economic model, is that WETA anticipates that most of the users will come from weekend trips, meaning that trips will originate in Berkeley and be going elsewhere. Money won't be spent here or in the marina, but most likely in Marin and San Francisco counties. WETA has not been able to provide, to me, convincing specifics on the scenarios of where and how ferry users were going to bring us revenue, especially during the weekend ridership. And for me, this is basically an equity issue. I am concerned about the adverse effect weekend ferry users will have on the Berkeley families who flock to the marina, many of them from West and South Berkeley neighborhoods. Parking already is challenging within the marina on weekends. Families, bird watchers, senior strollers, dog walkers like myself, and other water recreationists depend on their cars. Please don't make it more difficult for them to take advantage of the unique environment that our waterfront offers by taking our parking. Thanks very much for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Kalchinska. Okay, do we have other members of the public signed up, Melanie, to speak on this item?
No one else has signed up.
Okay, any-
But he had another commitment. It looks like there's one, Kelly's iPad.
Yeah, I see Kelly's iPad. You want to identify yourself, or if not, go ahead and speak, either way.
Okay, thank you. Kelly Hammergren. I have a couple of questions about your reports that maybe you can put into your discussion. In terms of estimating the ridership, did you look at or did you consider riders that are maybe using the Oakland Alameda ferry right now or Richmond ferry switching to Berkeley, so that there might be an impact of decreasing ridership in one area and to get that ridership in Berkeley? So that was a question. I also had a question of why, with the IPCC giving us this stern warning this week that we need to change our ways and get off fossil fuels, why is WETA not going ahead and purchasing electric ferries sooner instead of waiting for Berkeley in 2026? It seems like we should start making that transition right now. And then as far as the economic assessment of West Berkeley, that I suppose it's good for you, but it really takes away the argument of equity, that is one of the fastest gentrifying areas of Berkeley. So I think in terms of saying that the ferry is going to give equity because it's in West Berkeley, I think that argument is flawed, given with what happened in the city council report on gentrification and equity a few weeks ago on March 22nd. So those were my comments.
Thanks, Ms. Hammergren. I will say we're not waiting for Berkeley on the electric ferries. We have a number of them. There's a couple of them already funded that we're working on, that won't come to Berkeley because Berkeley won't be ready for them. And I'll go back to the staff and I'll ask the question about whether or not there's a shift. Did we analyze the shift? I see Nigel Cabral has raised his hand. So Mr. Cabral, please.
Chair Waterman, thank you for your time. I just wanted to remind you that Tideline is running the current Berkeley ferry service. So, there is an option, and I'd like to, invite you on. We've started the service again. So just wanted to correct that part. So
thank you. That's important. And we should have mentioned that. Thank you. Jerry Bellows, please.
Hello. I'm very glad to be able to speak to all of you again. I'm glad you're meeting in person and hope to be able to get to your meeting sometime in the future. I'd like to thank the staff for creating such a good report. I think you very thoroughly researched the issues. I think a lot of the comments people have mentioned about parking and other issues are things that in the coming years won't be as big a problem because of changes in transportation, means of getting around, with some of the changes proposed by the state for changing modes of transportation and requiring different types of options. So I think you're moving forward with a good plan. You researched it thoroughly, and I commend you for your work. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Bellos. Other members of the public wish to address the board of directors on this item? Okay, if not, I'm going to close up the public portion of the comment period. So, Juan, I'd just like to go back to staff on the question from Ms. Hammergren about shifting potentially from Alameda, Oakland, or Richmond. Was that taken into consideration?
I'll start with this one, but just based on our overall agency experience, and then I'll see if our transportation expert, Bill Hurl, wants to weigh in on it. But plausibly, yes, there could be riders that shift to a Berkeley service from a Richmond service or Alameda Oakland service because it is much more convenient. We know the catchment area of the Richmond and Alameda services overlap with the Berkeley area, so that could happen. That would, knowing the precise number of riders that would be diverted would really entail a larger system-wide analysis to look at the same ridership forecasts for the Richmond and Berkeley services with the Richmond and Alameda services with the Berkeley service included in the network, and that analysis was not done. Bill, anything to add or correct there?
Well, yeah, a little bit of a correction. We actually, as you might remember from the methodology slide, we started with the Alameda County's regional transportation model to do the ridership forecast. So that model, as it says, is regional. So it included all the existing ferry services as well as the proposed Berkeley service. So it does take into account competition between those different lines. So the ridership forecast that you have now already reflects the degree of competition that model identified.
Okay, thank you. And I want to thank the members of the public for your commentary, by the way. I had a question. I'll turn it over to my colleagues. On the Berkeley to Larkspur run, I think that's one of the most exciting. That's something different. Now there's something different. That makes a lot of sense to me, and I think has a lot of potential. But you present it only as a weekend kind of a tourist approach as opposed to an everyday approach. And I wonder about that because, there's a lot of people who live in Marin County who work in Berkeley and the Berkeley area. And then there's a lot of people who live in Berkeley and the Berkeley area who work in Marin County. And I wonder if it, and there's a lot of traffic on the Richmond Bridge. A lot of folks, I think, the only way to really do it reliably is to drive. That's the alternative, if that's what you got. So I was wondering about that, if you looked at the potential for making that a regular route as opposed to a weekend route.
Bill, maybe I'll have you start off this time.
Okay.
I'll add anything that that you don't cover.
All right, thanks, Mike. Yeah, so we look carefully at the weekday service, and as the maps, the drawings that we showed you earlier indicate, the catchment area from the ferry service is pretty tight, and it's only a mile or two around the actual terminal is where the primary or people come from to board the ferry and where they go to on the other end of the trip. And the problem is when you take the combination of Berkeley and the Larkspur terminal and you look at those catchment areas, they just don't have the sort of magnetic effect of having a large concentration of employment within that short distance on either end. There's good concentrations of employment, but it's not large. It's nothing like San Francisco or nothing like Oakland. And so when you look at the ridership, the numbers come out to be somewhat disappointing.
Okay, thank you. I think you don't, Mike, do you have something you want to add to it?
Oh, I'll just add that another factor is the availability of berthing facilities during the midday or during the weekdays at Larkspur. The Golden Gate, it's a Golden Gate ferry terminal. They currently operate a lot of service out of there. They were much more comfortable with the idea of initially bringing forward the weekend service where there is berthing capacity than investigating something on the weekdays.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it very much. Let me turn it over to the board of directors. Members who'd like to make a comment? Ask
Could I,
questions? Sure.
could I say something, Jim?
Yeah, you please do, Mr.
Yeah.
Director Tinsley.
Well, for years, we've been looking at Berkeley as a possible location, and I agree with you. It's like a missing tooth. The challenges, I think, are real in terms of the parking, but I'm also aware that this is going to take a while before we're ready to actually be present and operating on at that location, something like 2026. And as has already been mentioned, there will be changes in the methods of transportation between now and then that may mitigate a lot of these concerns. So it's been stated that this business plan is a living document. It's not giving the final answers to any of these questions. And it's certainly no reason at this point to abandon the effort because of the challenges that obviously exist. So that would be my comment.
Okay, thanks, Director Tinsley. Appreciate that. Members of the board, Director Moyer.
I'll go next.
Go ahead. I'm sorry, I couldn't see you there for a while, so.
Yeah, thank you to staff and a great partnership between the City of Berkeley and WETA. I've really appreciated the process that the agencies have gone through with the feasibility study and now the business plan, and understanding that there are many next steps. This is not we're just in the beginning of the process still. And that's something that I think we all need to keep in mind. I think this is definitely worth continuing to explore and work on and figure out in the next steps with environmental review and permitting and working with the many other agencies that need to be involved in that, as well as stakeholders, of course. I do have a couple of comments, and I know we've had this discussion before regarding, for instance, in executive summary, table 1, we're looking at the ridership projections between 2026 and 2035. The table shows that there's an expected increase in ridership of 6.5% roughly for the San Francisco and Mission Bay services between those 2 years. So over that 10-year period. But in the text, it's stated, so the non-bolded and the long paragraph below that, it says the ridership in the early years of service will likely be lower than what has been projected based on WETA's past experience in starting up new routes, as it takes time to change people's commute behavior and patterns, and that this ramp up period can be 10 years or so. And so my question is probably directed at CDM Smith. Why do we show such a minimal increase in expected ridership in table 1 when WETA is assuming very different numbers?
Yes. So I think the first thing is that WETA has had the general experience that there's kind of a slow ramp up when services start out. It takes a while for people, and so the models don't tend to actually reflect that. So this statement was added just to alert people to that. But you're right, the growth rate, which again comes from the Alameda County transportation model, the growth rate is relatively low. Part of this is, it goes back to what I was talking about earlier about the catchment areas. If you think about, we're talking about, an area of San Francisco
in an area of Berkeley that are pretty mature for the most part in their development. So the regional growth numbers don't really show a large amount of growth within those immediate areas. In fact, it's a slower rate for those areas than for the rest of the Bay Area as a whole, as you might imagine. So that's the reason. My personal opinion is those are pretty conservative. We sure have seen that WETA ridership can grow at much faster rates than what we're predicting. But in terms of being a good technician, we need to stick with kind of the information that we have. So that's where we are.
Okay, I appreciate it. In regards to parking, I'm a strong proponent for active transportation and transit access. And I feel strongly that 250 parking spaces at this location, when managed properly, is the right one. We want to encourage people to access this terminal by other modes than driving. We don't want to have massive flows of cars coming in and out. And we want to make sure that the space, the access to the waterfront is still accessible, very accessible by walking, biking, and other rolling devices as well as transit. But at the same time, I'm looking at the mode split calculations, which are based on, I believe, the feasibility study from 2020, rather than the business plan assumptions from 2022. So there's still a gap. In addition, the mode split on page 17, it has both a carpool category as well as a kiss and ride category. And kiss and ride, we know that someone will get dropped off and the driver will drive away. So there's no parking demand with that. But the carpool, you'll have cars associated with the carpool mode share as well. So if we have the higher ridership projections based on the feasibility, based on the business plan, and also include the carpool share, of which half, roughly half, will bring cars, we do come well above the 250. Having said that, I still think 250 is the appropriate amount. Don't overpark it, make sure that it's shared and managed properly. But we need to, in our next iteration of our business plan, I would encourage you to update these assumptions so that we do base it on the business plan numbers and also take into the carpool numbers. I don't know if WETA or CDM Smith has any feedback on that.
I could add a couple of things. The first thing is that we have two examples right now: the Richmond terminal, which has 319 spaces, and then the Harbor Bay terminal, which has 202 spaces. And we had a chart earlier that showed the comparative ridership with those services and what we're estimating for Berkeley, and so they're all in a similar range. So to me, that demonstrates that it's very doable to have a supply of 250 spaces and get the kind of ridership that we're forecasting.
Yeah.
The conversion of the mode share to the number of spaces is more complicated than it seems when you first start out. It's not just a matter of saying, well, we have 1,800 riders and then we divide that by 2 and we have 900 in one direction, and then so forth. There are a lot of considerations. One is that we know people, because the ferry service is spread out during the day, people can leave in the morning and return earlier in the day, and people can also leave in the afternoon and return earlier today. So we may have 250 spaces, but actually the utilization of those spaces could be more than 250 cars. And so that that covers some of that. So there's not a one-to-one matchup between the mode share and the number of spaces. It's a more complex calculation. And I could go in more detail, but I think that's kind of enough to give the general picture.
Yep. And then I love to see that there's already starting to be some discussion with AC Transit regarding coordination on line 51B. Let's make sure that that continues, and also, of course, shuttle discussions. Of course, we're several years out, but having really strong transit access and shuttle access will, of course, have a very big impact on the mode split. So whatever we can do to increase the mode split or the mode share of transit from an estimated 5% to 15 or 20 or 40%, even better. And the same goes, of course, with bike and rolling device, micromobility options as well. We know that with battery technology that we're going to be limited in our range or how far we can go. And so Berkeley to downtown San Francisco seems to be about half the distance of Berkeley to Larkspur. And we're talking about using the electric battery technology for the weekend service potentially as well. And I just want to make sure, that's, I guess it's a question for Mike and the team. Was that taken into account, that the distance between Larkspur and Berkeley is feasible?
At a high level, yes, in that we have included budget in the capital expenses for charging facilities. And, you know, the details of what the charging needs would ultimately be to support that route, we don't know that yet. And so it's a placeholder budget, you know, and that'll be refined. And, you know, it's a really good example of the type of thing as we get through the preliminary final review process. By the time we're getting some actual electric boats into our fleet and have some real-time practical experience with them, we can sharpen the pencil on these. Hopefully those costs are going down, but if they go up, we'll account for that as well and incorporate it into the plan.
Sounds good. And also we see an incredibly rapid evolution in technology now in the EV space and in electric water transit service as well, and green technology in general. So even a few years out may look very different than it does today. And then my final comment again is just that I truly appreciate the public feedback that we have received today and that we continue to receiving. I do feel strongly that discussions with BCDC and other regional agencies and stakeholders and the environmental review will take into account many of the outstanding questions. And so I truly appreciate the feedback we have received. So thank you.
Jim, I think you're.
Thanks, Director Alba. Director Moyer?
Yes, thank you. So first and foremost, I want to thank the staff and our consultants for the efforts that have gone into this. I thought the report was easy to read. I appreciate that. I also really appreciate the acknowledgement that this is a work in progress and that it will continue to evolve as the work is and the research is done. I also want to follow up on Director Alba's comments and thank the community for your involvement and your comments. I want to invite you to join us in person. You're not that far away. Would have loved to have had you here with us in person today, and hope you will join us the next time so that we can be part of the community with you. I think it was Mr. Fielder who said that the marina area, the Berkeley Marina area is a jewel, and I couldn't agree more with that characterization. It really is. And to see that the community of Berkeley and its surrounds is enjoying the waterfront is exactly what, at least for myself, we have long tried to achieve. And we don't want to do, at least for me, I don't want to do anything that disrupts that. We want to augment that. And so I think it's really important that we continue to look at how we are augmenting that. I have concerns about that last mile. I know we spent a lot of time talking about that today. I'm not yet persuaded that we've cracked the code on that. I'm not persuaded yet that the ferry service is a compelling choice over the other modes of transportation, such as BART, given where the vast population of Berkeley resides. So I'd like to understand that more. I feel that Western University Avenue cannot support more than 250 parking spaces. The transportation congestion alone, I think, would be a disincentive for anyone wanting to ride the ferry. So I support the reasons that you gave, Director Alba, but I think that that's an issue as well. Maybe there's a nexus with the parking at Golden Gate Field. I have no idea. That is not my area of expertise. But I think we really need to spend more time on the transportation plan. I don't know how old the Alameda Regional Transportation Service model is, but it's something I would like to understand more, because I think that is critical to the success of the ferry service as from the commuter side. And I appreciate, Nigel, you're coming. I'd love to understand what ridership you're seeing on Tideline, to help us to understand where we are today and how we can project that to the future. What is really important to me, though, is the emergency response. I do not believe that the 80 corridor is appropriate for that level of population as the only way in and out of that area. And I do believe that is an important mandate of WETA. And it is our fiduciary duty to support all of the communities of the Bay. And that is a gaping area that we are not supporting. And it's something that we need to take seriously. So I do think that one area that is an obvious omission of the report right now is the regulatory area. I do appreciate the communication we received from Mr. McGrath, who I believe is a board member of the Regional Water Quality Control Board. And I would say that he has a certain expertise. I would really love to understand what engagement there has been with BCDC, particularly as it relates to sea level rise. So I think that's a very important consideration in WETA's ability from an emergency response perspective to be able to serve the community from that site. So I really admire and appreciate all the work that's been done to date. I look forward to some more engagement on these issues. And I thank all of the speakers for the different areas that you've pointed out as we continue to look at this. But I too am very interested in continuing to look at this site for the reasons that I've just stated. So thank you all for that. And I look forward to further conversation.
Thanks, Director Moyer. Those are really all important points. And this idea is one that always receives a lot of debate. The initial vote to go forward to this point was not a unanimous vote at the time, although I think there was I think there was a lot of support for the idea, and there still is. So I think I don't really have any further questions. I think you've laid it out. My fellow directors have laid it out, really well. As I understand it, this is not dissimilar from what we did a few weeks ago in Redwood City in terms of accepting a study so that things could move forward. Madeline, is that about right?
Well, we actually have used the word receive this report. And you might note that the recital also indicates that we understand that this is the initial version of the report, that there will be, periodic updates, and to the extent that they are major in nature, they will again come back to the board.
So Are there any questions around that on the board members?
Not from me.
Nope.
Okay,
No.
do we have a motion on this item?
Moved.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second it with transportation. Second.
We have a motion and we have a second. Great. With that, Melanie, would you please call the roll?
Chair Wonderman,
Yes.
Vice Chair Moyer,
Yes.
Director Alba,
Yes.
and Director Intensely.
Yes.
The item passes.
Okay, thanks team for and consultants for all of the work, and thanks member of the public for your very thoughtful comments and input to this. I know this is really important for water transit and for Berkeley and the Bay Area. Let's move to item 9. Sea change hydrogen powered vessel demonstration project system.
Thank you, Chair Wonderman. This is an exciting opportunity. I know the board is aware of this opportunity. We haven't had a chance to discuss it with the board at a meeting, and so this item is information only, but it's intended to provide an opportunity to do that, for the board to give staff some direction that would help inform a potential future action item. And for us to hear that input and understand the considerations that we should be taking into account. I'll let you know about a little bit about this opportunity and the progress that we've made so far. This, I think, is a step that's consistent with WETA's leadership role that we've played in the greenhouse gas reduction space. We are a proven leader. We operate the cleanest ferry system in the country. We do that thanks to work that's been done over the years to convert our diesel engines to the cleanest possible diesel technology that exists. That work is ongoing, and we have taken a really aggressive step towards converting our system and evolving our system away from fossil fuel technology and towards a zero emissions future. The sea change is truly on the cutting edge of that future. This is the first high-speed passenger ferry vessel that would be operated in the US, and that we will learn a lot, regardless of who operates this vessel and what happens with it in the future. A lot will be learned about the technology and how we can best utilize it, the challenges associated with that. And we think that because WETA has played such a leadership role in the past and continues to do that, that this is in line with our mission, and partnering with the owner of this vessel to put it into service as a part of our network would be consistent with that mission. You know that CARB and Bay Area Air Quality Management District are partners that have helped to complete the construction of this vessel. We've heard from them and others, including the governor's office, that are encouraging us to figure out a way to operate this as a part of our network. Staff has been working with the owners of the vessel Switch to figure out the best way to do that, the best potential opportunity to do that. I'm going to turn it over to Tim Hanners, our operations manager, to discuss some of where we've landed in terms of how we would operate the vessel, and just as importantly, what it would cost in terms of resources to do that. The costs are significant for an agency that's going through the slow return of ridership and farebox revenue, but they're not insurmountable. We have been working hard to minimize the cost trade-offs. There are some opportunities that if we do come back with an action item as intended in May, there are some opportunities for cost sharing with the private sector that we've identified. We need a little bit more time to make sure that those evolve and are certain, but hopefully those will materialize and will minimize some of the trade-offs in terms of cost. Whatever falls to WETA to fund would be accommodated by the federal COVID relief funding that we've received. And we just need to understand exactly what that amount would be and what it does to our overall runway. And so we anticipate doing that in May and bringing something back to the board if all goes well. Tim, why don't you please describe the service plan and break down the costs if you could.
Thank you, Seamus. Good afternoon, Chair Wonderman and members of the board. Tim Hanners, Manager of Operations and Maintenance. I'm excited to bring this informational item to the board today to discuss a future 6-month demonstration project operating the Sea Change, the nation's first hydrogen-powered vessel. The Sea Change has recently completed sea trials and Coast Guard approvals in Seattle and is expected to be delivered to the San Francisco Bay Area by the end of April. This vessel can carry a maximum of 70 passengers and have a service speed of 11 knots or 12.6 miles per hour. WETA has worked with Switch to develop a service that efficiently tests the technology while also supplementing WETA's current ferry service along the San Francisco waterfront. This vessel would be deployed in the afternoon as a short hop connection between downtown San Francisco and Pier 41. This service would run 7 days a week. In addition, the vessel would also supplement WTA's current service to Chase Center and or Oracle Park during weeknight events. The final details of the schedule will be worked out in the next couple of weeks. The cost of the 6-month demonstration project is estimated to be $1.7 million. The lease through Switch is $785,000. We estimate maintenance at being $37,500. Berthing for the vessel to lay it up would be $8,700. Hydrogen fueling is coming in to be estimated around $417,000. And to crew the vessel, we're estimating with Blue and Gold, we're estimating that to be $440,000. Our next steps are continue to working with Switch and our partners develop funding strategies. Based on this board's input and suggestions, staff will then bring back a proposed service for consideration in a future meeting. Thank you for your time. I'm here to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Hanners. Appreciate it. Questions for Tim?
I will.
Go ahead, please.
So
Director
very,
Moore.
very exciting, Tim. So did I understand that you'll come back another time and tell us a little bit about anticipated ridership and revenues then?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. That was my question. So I will wait patiently, but very exciting.
Other directors, questions or comments?
Yeah, well, a question, where would the subsidy, the operations come from? Where would we get it?
There are some private sector partners and a public sector partner that have expressed some interest in partnering with us on this to be able to operate it over the period of 6 months. We need to have continued conversations with them to have some more certainty about what level of subsidy they would provide. Any subsidy over and above that would come from WETA sources, and it would be the federal COVID relief funding that is the best opportunity for us to provide subsidy to complete the costs associated with this 6-month pilot. The fair revenue, on the fair revenue front, we will provide an estimate of what fair revenue might materialize from this. It's a service that we already do offer with larger vessels. This is a smaller vessel. It's a 75-person vessel. So we know that the market is there, and we'll provide some understanding when we come back to the board about what component of the operating costs the fair revenue would cover.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Tony. Other questions? Director Alba?
This would primarily supplement events or short hops on regular weekdays too?
It would operate every day along the waterfront between Pier 41 and the ferry building. A special event service to Mission Bay would be a part of what this vessel would do. The goal would be to get as many eyes on this vessel as possible. We've had some preliminary discussions about potential zero emission curriculum that we could share with folks on board, education opportunities that we could highlight to make sure that the passengers are not just, they realize that they're not just riding a regular ferry vessel, but to help them understand the opportunity here and what it means for the future of vessel technology. So that's the goal. We think that service plan is the best opportunity for us to get as many eyes on the technology as possible.
Mhm. Do we want to open it up to public comment and then go back to board?
Yeah, let's do that. I don't have any immediate comments. I'll save them for later. So let's go to public comment. Melanie, has anyone signed up on this item?
No one has signed up to speak.
Would anyone like to speak on this item? You can push the famous hands raised hand feature.
Chairman Wonderman, this is Pace Rally at Switch Maritime, representing the owner. And I'm up in Bellingham right now in Washington. I just wanted to mention that I was on board the vessel this morning and outside running it. Yeah, working great and had a lot of beautiful footage today with Reuters. So look, thank you for bringing this up.
Thanks for the leadership that you've provided in getting it to this point, and we want to be supportive. Director Tintley, is that you wishing to speak?
Well, just one other question. Are there any particular safety issues with regard to this new technology here?
I mean, they went through years of testing with the Coast Guard and have received Coast Guard approval. With any new technology, there's a concern, but they've have to run through the pace with the U.S. Coast Guard, and they just recently received that approval.
Okay, thank you.
Other members of the public on this? We'll come back to the board. I don't see any, so let's go back to the board. See if I can go back to the board. If some member of the board would speak other than Tony, I'll see you guys.
I'll speak again. I think it's fantastic that we're looking into this and exploring it. I would love to see this as a demonstration project and really emphasizing the educational, informational awareness raising opportunity that we have. It should be clear that this is a partnership among many agencies, and whether it's philanthropy that could participate in it as well. And we just need to put it into context. We're talking about $1 million revenue shortfall from the pandemic recovery program extension into 2023 or fiscal year 2023. And we're talking about a $1 million or $1.6 million demonstration project for 6 months. So I want us to be conscious of the costs. If we can reduce WETA's financial exposure, that would be fantastic. I think it's an opportunity that we can't miss. It's technology that we want to promote and explore and invest in. So it's a golden opportunity to do that. We do need to keep in mind that this ferry can only move at 11 knots, and in regular service, we would need to get up above 28, preferably 35 for longer distances. So there are limitations, but we have an opportunity for a limited amount of time when this would be optimal to test out here in the Bay Area. And so really highlighting raising the awareness of the opportunities would be fantastic.
Thank you, Director Alba.
Thank you.
I'm with you on that. I share your excitement for this and the importance of moving it forward. And conversely, I don't want our excitement for moving this forward to in any way remove motivation from Seamus and his team about the other thing that you said, which was to find other supporters for this so that we're not alone out there. I know others have put in support to get to this place, but it is a fair amount of money, and so and we're not alone in wanting to see this kind of thing happen. This is a community of interest, I think, around this one. So let's pedal to the metal on that. Okay, let's find our friends, and we'll look forward to getting the next presentation. So I'm going to close this item. Thank you, Seamus and Tim, for the presentation, and move on to item 10, WETA 2050 Service Vision and Business Work Plan.
Good afternoon, Chair Wonderman, Kevin Conley, Manager of Planning and Development. We see neither you nor anyone else in the meeting, but we'll trust that you're there.
They're there. They're there.
We're here.
This is an information item to bring the board back up to speed, an update on the work that for the business plan, the WETA business plan, particularly the work of the business plan subcommittee, which is manned by directors Alba and Moyer. The overall story here in terms of the scope is that we have really been working to define what the scope will be over the next year or so. We've been looking at the expertise that's really required, and we see many areas that are specialist required in terms of expertise and consultant help. Those range from naval architects to look at things like new technologies in terms of vessels, organizational specialists in terms of WETA as an organization, how it should grow and evolve as our goals change into the future, and things like equity analysis and economists. The centerpiece of the effort, though, will be a resiliency analysis, where really it's not just a classic, and in planning terms, there's usually a classic way to do future studies like this on a 50-year horizon, which is a alternatives analysis. You look at different futures and you see how they fit with you. In this case, we're looking at multiple futures, but also multiple versions of WETA within those futures. So in terms of the future conditions outside of WETA, outside of our control, there's areas such as the level of development on the waterfront near our terminals. Will it be substantial? Will it be minimal, moderate? There's things like sea level rise, environmental factors there. How fast or slowly will that occur? How will that affect travel? Certainly there's something along the lines of the profile of work into the future. Are we going to go back to working 5 days a week, or is it going to be hybrid? What will work look like? Nobody knows what these futures are. So there's really an effort that needs to take place here to test them all. And at the same time, you're testing those futures against a future WETA. And we have suggested a couple of variations of WETA here, but these are really going to be defined and iterated in the process with all of our stakeholders. WETA may expand aggressively. WETA may expand more on a moderate pace. We may switch to electric vessels in a much more aggressive way, which may have a limitation in terms of our operation. We may find ourselves having technology developments and advances that open up new markets for us. All of these potential futures for WETA need to match with all the potential futures of the world, and that analysis will take place. And that's the centerpiece of the effort. Those efforts will require a planning specialist that's on board with us. It's the same group that did the recent Caltrain business plan, but it also requires a significant level of input and participation on the part of our stakeholders. And we felt like we got a lot of great stakeholder involvement and input in the fall, and we're going to continue that effort into the new year. So with that, I'll close what I have to say. I'll turn it over to the subcommittee members if you'd like to add or answer any questions.
I thought you covered it brilliantly.
And there was nobody even listening.
They actually were on our screen.
Okay.
May not have been able to see them, but
It was just the connection.
Got it, got it. It doesn't really matter.
no additions from me. I thought you did great.
Yeah, I would just say I truly appreciate staff's and the consultant team's willingness to listen and take into our feedback and listen to our questions. I think knowing what we now know, having been 2 years in a pandemic, nothing is fixed, and having resilient systems and transit services is so critical. We need to be able to respond and find solutions and services that will work under different conditions. And I think that that's what we're exploring in this business plan with the 16 different scenarios. And some will be, we can immediately cut them because they're not in any way realistic or feasible, and others will shine through depending on the different circumstances that we're going to be under over the next 10 and 20 or 30 years. So I think this is a forward-looking, realistic approach that the agency and the region will benefit greatly from over the coming years.
Excellent. Thank you, Director Alba. I just want to say thank you to you and Director Moyer for, I know you put a lot of work on this and it's big thinking, and I want to thank Kevin and the staff for this as well. And, you know, it's critical to the future of the organization to be able to define what that future looks like, look at the options, and do it in a way that's meaningful. And it's not an exercise, it's a serious consideration of the world of the possible and the implications of all that. Let me at this point, let me open it up, unless Director Intintily, you have a comment?
No, I don't.
Okay, let me call for Melanie. Are there any members of the public who signed up to comment on this?
No one has signed up to speak.
Okay, anyone wish to? Item number 10, our long-term service plan. Vision. Okay, we'll close the public comment period on this information item. Let's move on to item number 11, public comments on non-agendized items. Melanie, are there any members of the public who wish to address the board on a non-agenda?
No one has signed up.
Sorry?
No one has signed up, I'm sorry.
Does anyone wish to? This would be the moment to do it. Okay, I'll close the, with that, I'll close the public comment period on item number 11. I want to thank everybody for your work, going back to the beginning of the meeting. We're at a critical time. I guess everybody knows it, and I know everybody's working really hard on it, and I'll circle back to the comment as well Director Moyer made about Mr. Blum, and honor, having notes in the minutes to honor Mr. Blum and for an incredible career, and to thank him for a lifetime of service. So with that, I'll adjourn the meeting.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.